Somewhere in Atlanta, behind a steel vault door that only a handful of people on Earth are ever allowed to open, sits a single piece of paper, not gold, not jewels, a recipe, and it belongs to a drink you can buy for less than $2 almost anywhere on the planet. Coca-Cola is opened more than 1 billion times a day, over 200 countries, more countries than are even members of the United Nations. But the story behind that bottle involves a drug addiction, Nazi Germany, murdered Union leaders, and a Soviet general hiding his favorite soda from his own government. By the end of this video, you'll never look at that red can the same way again. Let's start at the beginning. Because the beginning is stranger than you think. It's 1865. The Civil War has just ended. A young Confederate cavalryman named John Pemberton rides home to Georgia with a saber wound cut across his chest. That wound never fully heals, and like thousands of soldiers from both sides of that war, he's handed morphine to manage the pain. He becomes addicted to it. But Pemberton wasn't just a soldier. He was one of the most respected pharmacists in Atlanta, and addiction wasn't something a chemist accepts quietly. It's a problem he tries to formulate his way out of. At the time, a popular French tonic called Vin Mariani was sweeping the country, a blend of Bordeaux wine and coca leaf extract. Coca leaf, the same plant cocaine comes from, was legal, unregulated, and marketed as a miracle cure for practically everything. Pemberton studied it, then built his own version. He called it French wine coca, a mix of alcohol, coca leaf, and kola nut, a caffeine-heavy nut imported from West Africa. He sold it as a nerve tonic, a cure for exhaustion. According to his own ads, a cure for impotence. Then, in 1886, Atlanta's county government passed a prohibition law. Alcohol was suddenly illegal to sell, and Pemberton's entire tonic was built around wine. He had two options: shut it down or reinvent it. He chose to reinvent it. Pemberton stripped out the alcohol and reworked the formula: coca extract, kola nut, sugar, citric acid, and a blend of oils. On May 8, 1886, he carried a jug of the new syrup to Jacob's Pharmacy in downtown Atlanta. A soda fountain clerk mixed it with carbonated water instead of plain water, almost by accident. And the drink people tasted that afternoon was, for the first time, something we'd actually recognize. His bookkeeper, Frank Robinson, came up with the name Coca for the coca leaf, Cola for the kola nut. He wrote it out in the flowing cursive handwriting bookkeepers used at the time, and that handwriting is still the Coca-Cola logo today. It hasn't meaningfully changed in over a century. Here's the detail almost nobody learns, and it matters. That original 1886 formula genuinely contained trace amounts of cocaine, pulled straight from real coca leaves. It was legal. It was common. Coca-Cola marketed itself as a brain tonic, an intellectual beverage, and honestly, a little cocaine in your soda water probably did make people feel sharper. Hold on to that. We'll come back to it. In its first year, Pemberton's drink sold an average of 9 glasses a day. 9. It cost more to make than he charged for it. By any measure, it was a failure, and Pemberton wouldn't live to see it become anything else. Worn down by decades of addiction and illness, he sold off pieces of the business just to survive, and in 1888, he died virtually penniless, the inventor of what would become the most recognized brand on Earth, without a cent to show for it. So if Pemberton created Coca-Cola, who actually built it? That's where Asa Candler comes in. Candler was sharp, ambitious, and relentless, and piece by piece, he bought up the rights to Pemberton's formula until he owned it outright. But Candler understood something Pemberton never fully grasped. This was never really about the syrup. It was about the marketing. He flooded Atlanta with free coupons for a complimentary glass of Coca-Cola. He put the logo on calendars, clocks, serving trays, fans, streetcars, the sides of entire buildings. And it worked. Within a few years, nearly every soda fountain in the country carried Coca-Cola, and a huge share of Americans had never even paid for their first taste of it. Candler had stumbled onto a principle advertisers still live by today. Give people a free sample of something sweet, caffeinated, and habit-forming, and they'll come back and pay for the next one themselves. But his biggest decision came in 1899. Two lawyers pitched him an idea. Instead of only selling syrup to soda fountains, why not bottle the drink and sell it everywhere? Corner stores, train stations, anywhere. Candler barely blinked. He sold them the bottling rights for a single dollar, convinced he was handing over something worthless. He was wrong. That $1 deal created the bottling franchise system, an army of independently owned plants across the country, each one buying syrup from Coca-Cola and handling the bottling and distribution locally. It's essentially the same model Coca-Cola still runs on today, and it's a massive part of why the company was able to expand as fast as it did, without ever needing to build or own a single factory of its own. By the 1910s, success had created a new problem: imitators. Dozens of copycat colas appeared on shelves in bottles that looked almost identical to Coke's. So the company launched a contest, challenging glass manufacturers to design a bottle so distinctive that people could recognize it in the dark, just by touch. A glassworks company in Terre Haute, Indiana, delivered the answer: a curved, ribbed bottle said to be inspired by the shape of a cocoa pod. Introduced in the mid-1910s, that contour bottle became one of the most recognizable pieces of packaging in the history of consumer products. It still is. Then, in the 1930s, Coca-Cola did something that reshaped how an entire culture pictures a holiday. The company hired illustrator Haddon Sundblom to paint Santa Claus for its winter ad campaigns. Sundblom's Santa was warm, round-bellied, rosy-cheeked, dressed in bright red and white, Coca-Cola's own brand colors. Those paintings ran year after year, and they helped cement the modern image of Santa that most of the world still pictures today. A company selling carbonated sugar water had quietly helped shape how millions of people imagine Christmas itself. By now, Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink anymore. It was becoming a symbol, and symbols have a way of getting pulled into places you'd never expect. It's 1941. The United States has just entered World War II, and Coca-Cola's president, Robert Woodruff, makes an extraordinary promise. Every man in uniform will get a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents, wherever he's stationed, whatever it costs the company. That single sentence would reshape the entire company. To keep it, Coca-Cola built bottling plants right behind the front lines, alongside American bases in North Africa, Europe, the Pacific. Soldiers got their nickel Coke. But something much bigger was happening at the same time. Coca-Cola had just built a global manufacturing network, funded largely through military logistics, planting its flag in dozens of countries years before ordinary civilian trade could have gotten it there. When the war ended, Coca-Cola didn't have to expand into the world. It was already there, waiting. But that's only half the story, because on the other side of that same war, something far darker was unfolding under the same name. Back in 1933, a German businessman named Max Keith took over Coca-Cola's German subsidiary, right as Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party were seizing power. Keith was ambitious, and by most accounts, devoted to the company above almost anything else. Under him, Coca-Cola sales in Germany exploded, from roughly 100,000 cases in 1933 to over 4 million cases by the eve of the war. The company sponsored the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Photographs show Coca-Cola banners hanging near swastikas. At a company anniversary event, Keith reportedly led a mass Nazi salute in honor of Hitler's birthday. Then, in 1941, America entered the war against Germany, and Coca-Cola's German branch was severed completely from its parent company in Atlanta. No syrup, no secret flavor concentrate, nothing. Keith had a business to save, and almost nothing left to save it with. So he gathered his chemists and told them to work with whatever scraps German wartime rationing allowed. A fruit-flavored soft drink nobody had tasted before. When it came time to name it, Keith told his staff to use their imagination, in German, fantasy. One of his salesmen simply blurted out, "Fanta, that's it. That's the origin of Fanta." Born inside Nazi Germany, invented by a Coca-Cola executive scrambling to keep his factories running without a drop of help from the parent company. After the war, an internal investigation concluded Keith had never formally joined the Nazi Party and had actually used his position to keep the German operation from being seized by the state. Historians still argue over exactly where pragmatic survival ends and complicity begins. But one thing isn't up for debate. The same brand handing Coca-Cola to American soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy was, at that exact moment, deeply entangled in the economy of the regime those soldiers were fighting. One company, two wars, two completely different stories, running side by side. But that's still not the strangest place Coca-Cola turned up during a war. After World War II, Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the general who led the Red Army into Berlin, developed a genuine taste for Coca-Cola. There was just one problem. In the Soviet Union, Coca-Cola was viewed as a symbol of American capitalism. A Soviet marshal couldn't be photographed drinking it. So, according to the story, Zhukov quietly asked his American counterparts a strange question. Could Coca-Cola be made to look like something else? Something more acceptable for a Soviet officer to be seen holding, like, say, vodka. The request reportedly climbed all the way up to President Harry Truman, who passed it along to a Coca-Cola executive. Company chemists stripped out the caramel coloring that gives Coke its brown color. It turns out that color barely affects the taste at all, and produced a completely clear version of the drink, bottled in plain, unmarked glass, with a white cap stamped with a red star. 50 crates of it were quietly delivered to Zhukov in 1946. To anyone glancing at his desk, it looked exactly like a bottle of vodka. In return, Coca-Cola's delivery trucks reportedly moved a little more smoothly through Soviet-controlled checkpoints in occupied Europe. A war hero, secretly hooked on an American soda, disguising it as alcohol, with the President of the United States personally helping arrange the cover-up. You couldn't invent a stranger footnote in corporate history if you tried. And on the other side of the world, in a small village in southern India, a different kind of harm unfolded, slower, but just as devastating. In 2000, Coca-Cola's Indian subsidiary opened a bottling plant in Plachimada, a village in the state of Kerala. Within a couple of years, local farmers noticed something alarming. Their wells were running dry, crop yields were collapsing, and families who'd relied on groundwater for generations were suddenly facing scarcity. Investigations, including one from India's own groundwater board, found the plant was pulling well over 1 million liters of groundwater a day, far more than the land could sustain, while releasing contaminated waste into the surrounding soil and water. Villagers, many from India's Adivasi and Dalit communities, among the country's most marginalized people, organized protests that lasted years. In 2003, a local court ruled the extraction illegal and ordered the plant to stop drawing groundwater. By 2004, under mounting pressure, the plant shut down completely. Coca-Cola has always disputed the extent of its responsibility, pointing to droughts and shifting monsoon patterns as alternative explanations. But 2 decades later, residents of Plachimada say they still don't have reliable clean drinking water, and a promised compensation package worth roughly 216 crore rupees, tens of millions of dollars, has never fully been paid out. One elderly resident, Kanyama, put it simply to a reporter years later. Before the factory came, their wells held sweet water. After, the water level just kept dropping. These are the parts of Coca-Cola's story that never make it onto the packaging. Now here's the detail that ties this entire story back to where it began. Remember what we asked you to hold on to? That original 1886 formula really did contain a small amount of actual cocaine, pulled from real coca leaves. For years it was openly part of the recipe. no different, legally, than caffeine or sugar. As public understanding of cocaine's dangers grew and regulations tightened in the early 1900s, the company gradually reduced and then removed the cocaine content while continuing to use spent coca leaves, the leftover plant material once the cocaine has been extracted, purely for flavoring. That practice reportedly continues in some form to this day, under a legal agreement with U.S. federal regulators. Think about that. One of the most wholesome, all-American, family-friendly brands on the planet has a direct, unbroken supply chain link to the coca plant, the very same plant cocaine comes from, tracing all the way back to a pharmacist trying to cure his own addiction. And that secret formula, the one sealed inside that vault we opened this video with. In 1985, Coca-Cola actually changed it, and the backlash nearly broke the company. Facing shrinking market share against Pepsi, Coca-Cola's leadership made a bold bet. They reformulated the recipe to taste sweeter, tested it in blind trials against 200,000 consumers, and launched it as New Coke in April 1985, calling it the biggest change to the drink in 99 years. The backlash was immediate and furious. The company was flooded with up to 8,000 angry phone calls a day and tens of thousands of complaint letters. Protest groups formed. People hoarded cases of the old formula in their basements like it was about to vanish forever. One executive received a letter addressed simply to Chief Dodo, the Coca-Cola Company. Just 77 days after launch, Coca-Cola surrendered, bringing the original formula back under a new name, Coca-Cola Classic. It remains one of the most studied failures and most unexpected recoveries in business history. Whether it was a genuine mistake or, as some skeptics still whisper, an accidental stroke of brilliant free publicity, we may never fully know. So the next time you crack open a can of Coca-Cola, you're not just drinking soda, you're drinking 140 years of history, a pharmacist's addiction, a wartime promise, a Nazi-era substitute drink still sitting on shelves today, a secret formula that survived its own company trying to kill it, and a footprint, both cultural and environmental, that reaches almost every corner of the planet. That's the strange part about the food and drinks we take for granted. They look simple on the shelf, but almost every one of them is hiding a history this wild, if you actually go looking for it. That's exactly what we do here on Food Lore, digging up the hidden, twisted, and sometimes disturbing stories behind the things you eat and drink every single day. So if this one got you, there's a lot more where it came from. Stick around,